Hi guys, hope everyone's well and welcome back to the Improvement Podcast. In this episode today, I'm going to touch on why you struggle with your weight and pretty much talk about why I think so much individuals struggle to keep their weight in a reasonable spot and why I think so much individuals are either classed as overweight and obese. So give my 2 cents on it and also how you can kind of manage your weight effectively and some habits and practices you can put in place to help you do so. Because if we know the issue, we can find the solution. Without knowing an issue, we can find a solution accordingly, and we might try and maybe put practices in place like tracking calories, which can help. However, if we don't address the root cause, then we're kind of putting a band-aid over the problem. What I mean by that is, let's say you overeat just because you've got poor structure and routine for whatever reason, and let's say you track calories, you've still got poor structure and routine, so you're relying purely on willpower through tracking calories to manage to eat an appropriate amount. Whereas what we want to do is we want to have good habits and practices in place so that we naturally eat less calories. That should be the goal, and that's going to make dieting a lot easier. So to start off, before jumping into the episode, regardless of what platform you're listening to this on, if you haven't already, any ratings or reviews would be massively appreciated. So subscribe if you're on YouTube, leave me a review if you're on Spotify, leave me I believe you can do ratings on Apple Podcasts as well, or a review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. Any support is massively appreciated. As well as that, when I'm on it, feel free to share it on your story on Instagram or whatever platform you're on. Any kind of support you give me is just more incentive for me to keep improving the podcast and to keep pumping out informative and valuable episodes for yourselves. So apart from that, let's get into the episode. Thank you very much in advance. And as for like an introduction, so like about 38% of the whole population on Earth is overweight or obese, which is a ridiculous figure considering how many kind of countries and areas in the world are still kind of malnourished and still don't have like appropriate living conditions or enough money, or don't even have currency available. It's an absolute crazy amount. And over 60% of over 18s in England are overweight, which again is a crazy figure and is a bit more of a realistic figure for kind of our day-to-day life in countries like the UK. So absolutely massive. So I'm just going to pretty much provide my thoughts on why I think this is, starting with nutrition. So one of the reasons I think people struggle with their weight is just having excessive consumption of processed foods available. So processed is quite vague. A lot of things are technically processed. You could argue having something like a rice cake is processed. You could argue maybe a yogurt's processed as it's not straight from the cow. You could argue having other healthy foods are kind of processed, or foods that people would class as healthy or low calorie. So processed is obviously quite vague. When I'm talking about processed foods, I'm talking about foods that you don't kind of pick from a tree, grow, or not like an animal product, if that makes sense. Things that aren't that. I'm not one of those individuals who think, right, you're going to die if you eat some cereal, or cereal's bad for you or whatever. But typically, if you eat whole foods that aren't that processed, they're typically going to be more filling. For example, when I'm thinking about processed foods, think about things like chocolate, think about things like cereal, crisps, fizzy juice, fruit juices. Not that fruit's obviously good for you, it's a lot of benefit, but the foods that are processed is usually quick, easy, taste nice, and are also calorie dense, which is why we kind of opt for it. And like the reason why this what that basically does is leads people to overeat when you eat kind of a lot of processed foods, because typically, like I said, they're very calorie dense and they don't manage satiety very effectively. What I mean by that is when you eat things like what I just listed, crisps, chocolate, pizza, burgers, things that aren't like single ingredient and like whole foods and are quite kind of processed, they're more enjoyable for one, so it's more easy to overeat, and they don't give us the same sensations of satiety. And a good example is if you, let's say I told you, right, you can eat as much as you want, but it needs to be from whole grains, needs to be from lean meats, needs to be from fruit and vegetable sources, no liquids, no liquid calories, no kind of processed foods. You're naturally going to eat probably a lot less calories in comparison to eating things like donuts, chocolates, cakes, desserts, and other things like that, because they're a lot more filling. They're also going to be a lot more nutrient dense and better for your health. So typically tasty foods scale with calories. So foods that are quite low in calories are also going to be quite bland to an extent, which is why we don't usually opt for them. That's not always the case. It doesn't mean your diet needs to taste boring and not enjoyable, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, an apple's not as enjoyable as a bar of chocolate because of the nutritional value like a bar of chocolate has in terms of how much calories is in it. So typically when foods that I think are high in carbohydrates, high in fats paired together, they're going to be quite tasty. They're also going to be really easy to overeat. So that's typically why I feel like people overeat and struggle in terms of the nutrition side of things. As well as that, eating out excessively. When you eat out, you don't just eat, like if you go to a restaurant, you get, let's say, whatever you get, you're not just eating if you get chicken, you're probably not just eating chicken. You're eating chicken, but that's probably cooked in some sort of oil. Same with pretty much most, or like 90% of the food you get when you eat out, it's probably cooked in some sort of oil that's got quite a lot of fat in it. Again, which doesn't really contribute much to satiety. You also, what you find when you eat out as well is like there'll be a lot of sauces. Like when you go out, the restaurant's intention isn't to give you a macro-friendly option. It isn't to give you foods that's going to fill you up and help you manage your weight. 90% of the time. Depends where you eat, depends what's on the menu. Some menus have more healthy options, which is ideal. But most restaurants, most places, they don't have that in the forefront of their mind. That's not their priority. Their priority is for you to enjoy the food, for it to be cheap, for them to kind of make and give to you, and for you to come back. So we're obviously going to want to eat places that are going to be cheap and are also going to be enjoyable. So they're typically also going to be places that are probably a bit high in calories when we think about it. So eating out is something that I think also leads to individuals being overweight. And not that eating out's bad, not that you can't get good options, but most people don't, and most people tend to eat quite a lot of calories if they eat out, and most places, like I said, will add in sausage, things like that just kind of bump the calories up in whatever meals you are consuming. So as for activity, so another regarding activity, most people are pretty inactive in my opinion, or at least less active than they used to be in the past. When you think about like kids, children, teenagers, they have a lot of things to entertain them available that's not going to burn much calories. What I mean by that is my dad always tells me when he was young, like he was always on the go in terms of like playing sports every day of the week, etc. Whereas some kids now, they don't do any sport at all, which I think is pretty horrendous. And because they've got entertainment readily available in their fingertips through their phone, through their Xbox or PlayStation, through a tablet, through VR nowadays as well. So you've got so much things to keep you occupied that doesn't burn any calories, that don't require any activity, which leads you to be very sedentary. You've also got, like for adults as well as children, teenagers, whatever, you can communicate with individuals from your fingertips. You can call someone very easily. You can FaceTime them. You can work remotely. You don't need to go in from work, which means less kind of walking if that's to a bus, if that's literally walking from a car park to an office, from your house to your car, etc. Seems very minute, but these things that cause us to move less and not have as high expenditure or high steps, high activity on a daily basis will accumulate and add up over time, because it doesn't take a lot to gain weight. In terms of, it just takes eating over your food or over your calorie maintenance a wee bit and just moving a wee bit less or being a wee bit sedentary to cause you to kind of gain weight. And yeah, so there's so much right now that keeps us occupied, that causes us to be sedentary, lazy. There's so much that gives us instant gratification instead of delayed gratification, which is the opposite of what will help you change your body composition, what will help you make progress. Same with like if you get a takeaway, you can order one straight to your house, you can get it on Just Eat, that sort of thing. So it's so easy just to consume more calories than we need and to move less than we ideally want to do just from everything that's available, if that makes sense. So as for kind of, and also like there's also like so much restaurants available nowadays as well, and like a lot of what we do in terms of socially contains either food or alcohol, especially in the UK. Like alcohol is very kind of prevalent, and there's quite a stigma around it. Like if folk will call you whatever kind of word, call you like when you don't drink, when you don't participate in these sort of things. So as for solving the diet issue of things, I think a good rule to stand by, regardless if you are tracking calories or not, regardless if you're dieting or bulking or whatever, like having like a 80-20 rule or something along those lines, meaning 80% of your diet coming from quality foods that are not processed, that aren't really, that pretty much aren't processed. So eating things like chicken or any sort of kind of lean meats, any sort of kind of like things like oats, any sort of kind of breads, things like that, things like pasta's not even bad at all, lots of fruits, lots of veggies, things like those sort of things. And the reason why is if you eat foods like that, like see if I told you, right, you can eat as much oats, rice, chicken, lean steak, eggs, vegetables and fruit as you want, you're probably not going to eat that much calories. Where if I gave you whatever your favourite takeaway type food is, a pizza, eat as much pizza as you want, you could probably double the amount of pizza as you can, let's say chicken, rice and veg, just because it's so calorie dense, it's so low in volume but high in calories. And then people wonder why they can overeat. So making sure the majority of your food is clean, is not really processed, is going to be ideal. When I say processed, I don't mean you can't eat a rice cake. You're not going to die if you eat a rice cake. You're going to be fine, of course. But just make sure the majority of your diet's from whole foods that kind of fill you up. I think a good analogy to stick by is get the majority of your food from things that you can either pick from a tree, kill, or grow, meaning animal products and things that you can grow out the ground or pick from a tree. And that's going to help massively with basically helping moderate and manage your calorie intake while also ensuring you've got good nutritional value in your foods, so you're not eating foods that aren't going to give you much kind of health benefit and leaves you with deficiencies. So I think that's something that's super valuable to stick by. And a few things that contribute towards feelings of fullness is food volume in your stomach and also how much calories we've actually consumed. So if we can give ourselves more food volume in our stomach by eating foods that are typically higher in overall size but lower in calories, which is typically going to be things like whole foods. Obviously some processed foods can be an exception, especially with a lot of like maybe foods in the fitness industry now becoming a thing, like protein puddings, protein yogurts, things like that, and low calorie crisps and that, which are fine to eat and there's no problem at all, but still having the whole foods might be a bit more filling. And when you, let's say, go to the shops or whatever, when you get your food, I think preparing it yourself is super valuable. So if, let's say, you buy or order some sort of kind of chicken dish or whatever, it's probably not going to be as filling as, again, making it yourself, and you've got more control over what ingredients you're putting in it. You're not putting ingredients in it that aren't, again, going to contribute towards satiety, etc., and hunger. And so yeah, with your diet, having a good amount of kind of whole foods, like I said, not eating out too much, eating out in moderation, I think is going to be absolutely key. And as well as that, just aiming for like having a good amount of protein in your diet and having your 5 a day As much as your parents probably told you have a 5 a day, have your 5 a day. It's important. It means you're going to hit your nutritional needs or be more likely to. And again, it's going to contribute towards feelings of fullness. And something I think helps a lot with the diet side of things is when you're thinking about making positive change, instead of thinking removing things from your diet, thinking about adding things to your diet. What I mean by that is, if you think, I'm not going to eat this, I'm not going to eat that, it leads you kind of not having much food choices and kind of relying on willpower. Whereas if I tell you, instead of trying to not eat something that's not going to be that good for you for breakfast, if I tell you have a good quality breakfast, something that you know fills you up, that you enjoy, then it's going to lead you to have options kind of available, if that makes sense, instead of just removing things. And for example, if I say eat, let's say I said eat your 5 a day, or let's say even 10 fruit and veg a day, or yeah, let's say 10, then once you get round to eating all 10 of those, you're probably it's going to unconsciously make you eat less of those poor food choices. So instead of thinking what to avoid, think what to have, and that will help massively. So in terms of the activity side of things, like I said, most people are quite inactive. Most people are sedentary and don't do enough activity on a daily basis. So what I recommend is find like a form of exercise you enjoy and that you can adhere to long term. And this doesn't have to be the gym. Like for example, I had a client, one of my mates, who he signed on from a coaching service. He done well. He lost a good bit of weight, but then like he stopped coaching with myself, and he kind of stopped training. He stopped the gym, and he wasn't really kind of sticking to it. And he's tried like after the coaching process, even before the coaching process, to stick to the gym, but it's just not his thing, if that makes sense, which is completely fine. But he's now doing like martial arts, and he's sticking to that a lot better. He's enjoying that a lot more, and as a result, it's leading him to help in terms of his maintaining his body weight and maintaining like fat loss and keeping himself in reasonable shape. And what's magic about that isn't the form of exercise he's doing, it's the fact that he enjoys it, which means he can adhere to it long term. So a big part of making progress with training or activity is just doing what you can adhere to long term. Like when we think about what breeds results, it's never something short term. It's never something in a week. It's never something that lasts a few days. It's what you can do over a long period of time and also keep up. And so yeah, find what that is for yourself. Find what you enjoy in terms of exercise. What are you motivated to do? What do you enjoy doing? For me, it's training in the gym. For you, it might be running. For someone else, it might be a martial art. For someone else, it could be whatever. It could be cycling. So find what you enjoy. And also pick up hobbies that require expenditure as well. Like it could be hill walking. It could be going temping bowling with your family or friends or that on like a weekend, instead of sitting and eating rubbish or whatever. Like just find things that you can do. It could be washing your car if you enjoy that. It could be anything. Like just keep busy, and also like find hobbies that you enjoy. Find things that you enjoy that require expenditure, and you can also like think about what you do with your friends and kind of use each other to help stay consistent, to help you put habits and practices in place that are going to be beneficial, and use each other to keep yourself accountable. And as for like the environment sort of thing, so surround yourself with people who have a positive impact. Surround yourself with people who help in terms of helping you adhere to certain things like going to the gym or whatever, or eating healthy, etc. Because you are a byproduct of your environment. I'm a very big believer of that. Like if you're around people that always eat out, always drink, always or never exercise, talk down on you for exercising and trying to make positive change, you're probably not going to get on very well. Same applies with like your nutrition. Like if you change your environment so you've not got any kind of calorie dense foods or a lot of kind of processed, not ideal fat loss foods to eat in the house, then you're probably going to be less likely to eat it. So your environment is absolutely massive. So consider who you're surrounding yourself with. What food are you buying and storing in the house that isn't going to contribute towards you having a like quality diet, etc. And maybe try and kind of resolve that through putting them in the harder to reach places and cupboards, etc., through not buying them. And then whenever you want to have like a dessert, you can't just instantly grab it and eat it, because some people will maybe eat certain foods that aren't great for them kind of out of impulse, and they don't, obviously they know what they're doing. They're not like asleep. They're not doing it while they're asleep. Although some people actually have done that before, but it's but just like make it as hard as possible. Create as much resistance between you and the habits that aren't conducive towards your goals. I've got an episode on that called Creating Resistance, which is super beneficial, and it will help you make some positive change. So give that a look. On the activity point of things, something I forgot to mention earlier is I was listening to a podcast myself, something I do very, very frequently on my end as well as producing them, and they were talking about the fact that in populations who exercise, the people who, I believe, as you exercise more, it's not like a direct correlation between or with the amount of calories you consume. What I mean by that, it's not like the more exercise you do, the more calories you actually consume. There was a study, and I believe the people who didn't exercise consumed more calories than people who were moderately active and lightly active. The people that were very active, I'm not sure about that, but what I basically mean is exercise doesn't actually cause you to eat more necessarily. So if, let's say, you are not active at all, you're probably more likely to be hungrier. I can't quite recall the reason why. I'm not sure if it influences leptin and ghrelin, which are basically the hunger hormones. But something else it could be due to is like when we exercise, we spike cortisol. Cortisol is basically the stress hormone. When stress is high, like cortisol's high, when we're in that fight or flight state, we're not usually hungry. What I mean by that is if you're on a run or if you're in the gym, you're not usually hungry during that period because your heart rate's pretty high. Same with periods with high stress. Let's say one of your family members falls ill or something. It's quite a sinister example. Let's say like they're going to the hospital and you're really stressed, you're worried about their health. You're probably not thinking, could go a McDonald's right now or could go a pizza or a burger. You're stressed, so you're not thinking about food, if that makes sense. So that could be another reason why. So not only will exercising overall be good for your mental health, physical health, but will also help in terms of your calorie management. And periods where you're exercising are periods where you can't consume calories. And typically just being busy is going to help in terms of your nutrition as well. It's like if you're busy, not only are you probably going to move more depending on what you're keeping yourself busy with, which will burn more calories if you're moving more, but also you probably won't think about food much. For example, today's a rest day for myself. I've been super busy kind of all morning and afternoon. It's 10 to 3. I've not touched a carbohydrate yet because I myself, I'm in contest prep now. I'm dieting, but I've not really thought about it an awful lot. I've not really had much cravings, or it's not been that kind of brutal kind of going the morning without having any carbohydrates because I'm busy. Like if you are just sitting about all day on your days off work or in the evenings, no wonder you're going to overeat. They're the periods where you're going to crave foods because you're not doing anything. So fill your free time with things that you enjoy, hobbies. Even if they don't burn calories, if you're sitting playing Xbox, you're probably going to be a bit more, I know I just said like that's people who are sedentary, which doesn't help. But if you're sitting doing something that keeps you occupied, that requires a lot of focus and attention, you're probably not going to be that hungry during it in comparison to if, let's say, you're just sitting doing nothing. So yeah, hope the podcast helped. Any questions or any specific episodes you'd like to see, please let me know. And like I said, any support is massively appreciated on the podcast. And if you don't already watch on YouTube, there's a lot of content going out on YouTube as well as podcasts on a regular basis. Right now, I'm going to try and get a podcast out on every third week, just because of my commitments and like putting out content on the education section for my clients, which you can see snippets of on YouTube. Still trying to get out YouTube contents as well as obviously personal training and online coaching as well. And before I go, actually, I will now be personal training out of Excite Broxburn and Excite Craigswood. So if you're in the West Lothian area and you're looking for a personal trainer, I'd love to hear from you. So just drop me a message on Instagram or an email. You can find my details in the description of the podcast, and just let me know if you're interested, and I can tell you more information, what packages I offer, etc. But thank you very much for listening or watching to the podcast, depending on what platform you're listening or watching on, and hope you have a great rest of your day.